the Deathwalker. A great looking class, I'm excited to play it, but there's a few things we really need to talk about. Now we only have access to level 1 cards, but I'm going to talk about, whether this class is actually even viable. So the class is based around a shadow mechanic. You're going to create shadows a couple different ways, and then you're going to consume those shadows to summon or buff up attacks or teleport, a bunch of different things. They've made some changes to what I would consider the main card, which is Call to the Abyss. And I'm going to go through which way makes the most sense. Should we be playing the top or should we be playing the bottom? And then I'm going to go through every card and talk about, why I think they'll work or not. And then we're going to go to a build at the end. Okay, let's get started with level 1 cards. Anger of the Dead. Top is a decent ranged attack where you can add Pierce by consuming a shadow. And it's one of those cards that if you know they're shielded enemies, you could maybe take it with you. But I don't believe the buff is enough. That rhymed. That sounded weird, but I don't think the buff is enough. Shadows are actually fairly hard to come by, and we've got a lot of different ways to use them, so not sure if we want to be using it for that. Initiative at 14 is good. And then the bottom, I don't know about this. I could never really get it to work well. There's other cards that you can use like Black Barrage or bottom or Wave of Anguish bottom where you can move shadows around. So this could potentially be useful. But I never could find a time to really make it work well. So I don't think it's, super great. Anyone out there who's used it to good effect, let me know kind of what your strategy was and comment below. Sunless Apparition. The top is a new style of summon where it's not a lost card. And I really like it a lot. I think that it just minimizes some of the problems that, Gloomhaven has with summons when they're lost and that they're just maybe a little bit too high risk for reward. This card, if you can even get it to attack twice before it dies, that's 6+ damage because it's using your modifier deck. It's going to be quite strong for level 1. And I actually think this is one of the core cards we should be trying to play almost right away. And I'll talk about, turn order and, starting moves, that sort of stuff coming up. And then the initiative at 96 is quite good. Nice and late. It's going to help us summon. The bottom is a teleport. I don't love the teleport. I don't think very often you're going to have shadows way out in front. It takes a lot to move your shadows way up, and so it's not like you're going to be able to use it for some big time mobility play. You're mostly going to have your shadows reasonably close to you, or they're going to be way behind you if you haven't found a way to use them or bring them with you. And then I think the loot on this to, consume a shadow for loot 1, shadows are not very plentiful. It should be loot 2 in my opinion. At loot 1, I really would only be using this probably very late in the scenario and only if it was very well in hand. Just quickly, right now, I've got a Frosthaven pledge giveaway live. Check down in the description and in the pinned comment most likely, and you'll see a link to the Frosthaven giveaway. And if you don't see a link in the pinned comment, it means it's no longer around. So make sure that when you're watching this, if you see it, go check that video out so that, you can give yourself a chance to win a free pledge of Frosthaven. Fluid Knight. Top is a nice, strong attack at level 1. 4 damage is pretty good. And this card's a bit strange because it's kind of like a ranged attack because you're attacking from the position where the shadow is. So it could really be anywhere. However, it's got a conditional requirement. You've got to have a monster next to that shadow, and because they don't target, unless you're moving shadows around, that can sometimes be difficult. That being said, if you can keep a decent amount of shadows out, this is going to be a fairly strong attack. The only problem is that sometimes you're not going to be able to attack the monster you want. It does produce Dark though, which is going to be good for Black Barrage and especially good for Forceful Spirits. And then the initiative at 24, pretty good for the class. Bit sad, but true, it's not a fast class. The bottom is also really interesting because you get to play this and it sits there until you want to activate it. So it's not a loss, but it is a persistent effect that persists from round to round, so you're never going to waste it. And then you get to decide when you're going to teleport so that, you know, you don't get hit with 1 damage and then teleport away. You get to decide, and it stays out. Very good card. And here's how I look at it. I think Sunless Apparition is key to this class at level 1. And so if you can get in there and tank a hit for your Sunless Apparition to keep it alive so it can keep attacking, that's worth 3 damage. And you're basically, you know, disarming a monster because you're going in there and taking no damage, even though you can take some effects. So let's call it half of a disarm. I don't know. You get the point. You're going in, taking aggro, keeping your Sunless Apparition alive. And so between the top and the bottom, this card ends up being very useful. Dark Fog. Top is a decent attack. Attack 2, hitting a 3 hex, and then cursing anyone it hits is fairly decent. But I would have liked it better if it was just curse, target 3, range 3. Then you don't have to try and fit everyone into a pattern because it's much easier to hit that way. And in this case, when you're doing 2 damage plus a modifier, you can actually kill one of the monsters in there and then you won't curse them. So I think I would have just preferred a multi-target curse. Let me know down in the comments if you actually like this card. I never really found it to be that useful. In my opinion, not worth a loss. Initiative also terrible. The bottom, move 1 shadow up to 5 hexes. This can be useful for keeping a shadow in the game, but it does take a bottom action, which means you're not going to move or do anything else useful. I also didn't use this a lot. I used, you know, some tricks, let's call them, where I would, you know, use Eclipse late in the second room and summon my shadows right near to the third room so I didn't have to move them a ton, stuff like that. Because I think if you get caught up in the I have to move all my shadows all the time game, you're actually going to be pretty ineffective, and you're going to find, like, I'm not keeping up with the party, or I'm just spending all my time moving shadows. And so for those reasons, this is not my favorite card for sure. Black Barrage. And this card in the previous iteration was called Black Arrow, and now it's Black Barrage, but it only hits 1 target? I'm not sure about that. Maybe they're talking about the bottom. Anyways, it's an okay attack. It's a very flexible attack. It's never going to be terrible. It's always going to be kind of middle of the road. You can buff it up with Dark, and, you know, attack 3 at 5 range is pretty solid, and you get an XP for it. And then 28 initiative, okay for the class. And the bottom, though, I think is going to be key for maneuvering your shadows properly. Because it's reusable, because you can actually move them 2 hexes, and you can move everybody. It's going to be great for not having your shadows keep up with you per se, but for positioning them to do some of your big loss attacks that need shadow positioning, or for Fluid Knight, stuff like that. Call of Doom. I don't know about this top. 1 attack to all adjacent enemies, but it's got to be around a shadow. I don't know. If you position right, you can probably hit a few people like this or a few monsters, but it's just not strong enough for me. Consuming a Dark to muddle them all can be useful. Initiative at 32 is kind of pushing into that, you know, not great range. But the bottom on this card, I think, is crucial for this build. It's a move 3. We need some mobility. And then it creates Dark. That's awesome. So you can power up, you know, Black Barrage and Forceful Spirits and whatever else. So I'm taking this card with me all the time, but I'm pretty much using it for the bottom. Eclipse. One of our core cards to generate a bunch of shadows in a very short period of time, but it has a couple problems. But first, let's talk about the previous iteration. So originally they had it at 2 shadows, now it's at 3, makes it a heck of a lot more viable. The problem is you can't play this in the first room. And that's one of the problems with the Deathwalker, which I'll get into more later, is that the Deathwalker starts so slow. If you play this card in the first room, your shadows, they're not making it to the 4th room. You do not have enough movement to move a bunch of shadows, you know, all the way through. And so if you power yourself up in the first room, you end up being underpowered later on, is what I found. So what I usually did was I actually played this card in the second room, close to the third door, so that I could use them in second room, third room, fourth room, that sort of stuff. And I could actually get them to the end of the scenario so that, I could do a bunch of cool stuff in the last room. And then 86 initiative is good for going late. And the bottom move 4, just going to be good solid utility for you in those first couple rooms to move yourself around when you need to. Lingering Rot. Top is a good late game powerful move. I think you're going to struggle a little bit though unless you're really good at positioning shadows and you've got quite a few shadows out. Poisoning all the enemies though is also very good to, buff up damage. So, you want to use something quick, a quick initiative with this card so that, all your allies can go in and smack around the monsters that are poisoned afterwards. And then move 3 and poison one adjacent enemy. That's just decent, solid utility. Shadow Step. Top is a very interesting card. You can move and attack, but you've got to move to where a shadow is. So usually it works best for just repositioning and attacking, but still a move and attack on top is going to be quite handy for us when we want to play a bottom, move shadows around or something like that. So you pretty much have to take this card. Although if you don't have shadows out in the beginning, it can be a bit, underwhelming, let's call it. Initiative 19, very good for the class. And then the bottom is just a good, big, situational move when you need to get somewhere, and then you're going to be able to put down a shadow where you end up. Great card overall. Call to the Abyss. And this one is going to get a little bit long. I thought long and hard about this. I played and tried different things. Here's the conclusion I came to. If you want to start out with this card, it is going to take you too long to get anything useful going. And like I said with Eclipse, you can't start out by playing Eclipse in the first room. All your shadows are going to get stuck there. You're going to have to use them up, and then in the middle of the scenario, you're going to have probably very few shadows. So it's nice to be able to throw Eclipse out in the second room, 5 turns in, 4 turns in, 6 turns in, something like that. So this card, you start out too slow. Think of it this way. You play this top and you play something bottom. Then the next turn you have no shadows out, so you can't use any of your shadow abilities. You've got to attack, so you attack second turn. Then you may get a shadow that turn, you may not, depends on if the monster dies. Then third turn you've got 1 shadow. Now you're going to start playing something like, let's say you want to play Sunless Apparition. So on third turn you play Sunless Apparition, you use your shadow. You have done nothing. You have done absolutely nothing basically for the first 3 turns because you haven't had shadows out. You haven't been able to do anything. So you actually aren't getting anything going in this particular scenario until turn 4. I was always struggling with this and going, when do I actually play this card? And if you don't play it fairly early, then you're not going to generate enough shadows throughout the scenario. Okay, let's talk about the bottom now. So the bottom, I looked at it and I thought, how can this be better than the top? And it isn't. Let me explain. So what I think you need to do, and this I don't like, because you're going to need a minor stam to really make this class do anything in any sort of quick succession. So the first turn, I think, you play the bottom of this, and you play Sunless Apparition, and right away on turn 1, you've got to summon out, and you're going to be ready to start dishing out damage on turn 2. Then you're going to minor stam, you're going to get Call to the Abyss back, and then turn 2, you're going to play Call to the Abyss top, and you're going to play something on the bottom that's going to allow you to keep your summon alive, whether it's moving in and taking a hit, or something along those lines, so that you can keep, your Sunless apparition alive, because if you can keep it alive for a few turns, it's going to be a very viable play for you. And this is really the only way I felt effective, was to pull out this quick combo and then Stam Potion back, Call to the Abyss, and start from there. And then build up some shadows and then pop Eclipse in the second room closer to the third room door. And, you know, then I actually started having a decent amount of shadows and I could start doing some cool things. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, we've got through Call to the Abyss. If you could, please go ahead, hit that like button. I hope this video is helping you out. And if you could, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so that when I publish new content, you're notified. I've got lots of other videos. I'm going to link one of them up here. Go ahead, check it out. And let's get on to Strength of the Abyss. Strength of the Abyss. It's a bit of a trap card, not gonna lie. And here's why. So early on, this card is going to be a basic to attack. And like I said, with Eclipse, if you pop Eclipse right away to power up something like this, you're not going to have enough shadows later on. You're not going to be able to bring them with you. And so I found this card a bit underwhelming. It's almost like a double loss that you can't use early. So, you know, at least first rest cycle, it's not going to be great for you. However, later on, as you're cycling through cards and you have less cards and you can use this card, you know, every third turn, every second turn, then 2 turns in a row, stuff like that. Later on, you can get some pretty good work out of this card. The initiative is the worst it could possibly be. Flip a coin. And then the bottom, when I first saw this, I thought, oh, this has got to be a core card. This looks good. We're going to use shadows to pump up every attack, push that damage up. But it's actually quite cumbersome to use because of the 3 range. And the +2 move, rarely, I think, are we going to use a shadow for +2 move. I almost never used it for that. And so the bottom is actually not nearly as good as you think. I think you're probably playing this for the top a lot more than you're playing it for the bottom. And we've got better losses as well. Really, the only time I really found this card to be really effective was when I played it in about the 3rd room and I just unloaded on, you know, a couple monsters and, you know, nuked my whole army of shadows. Wave of Anguish. The top is a great situational loss for later in the scenario, but why only 1 XP? Come on. It is better than Lingering Rot, though, in effect. So if you use something to position your shadows around, you can theoretically get 15 damage with this, and also you can attack the same monster more than once if they're adjacent to multiple shadows. And then the 58 initiative, not the greatest, but the bottom of this card is actually a really good card because you get to move and move your shadows. So you can reposition yourself and move your shadows, and that's really going to help you throughout the course of a scenario, you know, to get, you know, shadows in the right spot for Fluid Night, or, you know, to, you know, make strategic teleports, that sort of stuff. So very good card. Use the bottom throughout the whole scenario, then use the top at the end to really dish out some serious damage. Forceful Spirits. And I like this card because it's relatively easy to use, and a lot of the Deathwalker cards, I think they're actually going to be pretty complicated. Between this and Banner Spear, I'm not sure who's going to be harder, but I think that new players might struggle a little bit with all of the requirements of these classes. I mean, they feel drastically harder than the starting classes in Gloomhaven. Anyways, good top. Solid, you know, attack 3 to 2 targets and an XP when you consume dark. That's going to be very good. Initiative 34, not quite fast enough. And then the bottom, teleport to a hex with a shadow or adjacent to a shadow. This is just going to be good for repositioning. I don't think it's going to get you any big moves out front, but, you know, just sliding around, trying to protect your summon, it's going to be helpful for that as well. Rest in Shade. Top is a nice heal, but it's definitely going to be, you know, far more effective at higher player counts. It does produce dark every time, though, so that's really nice. Initiative 26 is pretty decent for the class. And then the bottom, Some scenarios you're really going to need this, others you aren't. I mean, in a smaller scenario, you're not going to want to use this as a loss, but in a really big scenario, you may need this to get your shadows, into the further rooms with you. I generally kind of took it or didn't take it, depending on that. But still, I mean, can be quite powerful in the right circumstances. Well, this class, it's definitely interesting. I like a lot of the things they've done. I still think it needs a couple tweaks to be a little bit more viable, though. It just feels like you're working so hard to get some things done. Like, compare Strength of the Abyss bottom to Crushing Weight by the Drifter. Crushing Weight, throw it down, get 6 charges of +2 damage to melee attacks, and there's other stuff that can move the tokens back. Much simpler versus Strength of the Abyss, where you've got to consume shadows and they have to be within range 3. I mean, it's not even close. I always felt like I was having to walk a razor thin line to actually be good with this class, and I think it's really punishing for a new player. It needs a stam potion to be viable at level 1. I mean, I don't think that's very good. This class is so slow to start. I think that this class needs a little bit more around mechanics, around maybe you should be able to move 1 shadow 2 spaces every turn, or move all shadows 1 hex, or whatever it may be to make it a little bit more viable. Or the class should start out with shadows or something like that. Maybe you turn Call of the Abyss into something that has charges, and for each kill you get 2 shadows or something along those lines. I haven't thought through it far enough to come up with a perfectly balanced solution, but I think you get the point. There needs to be a bit of a tweak on how things work. Okay, cards that I'm taking: Strength of the Abyss, Call to the Abyss, Sunless Apparition, Fluid Night, Black Barrage, Call of Doom, Eclipse, Lingering Rot, Shadow Step, Wave of Anguish, and Forceful Spirits. What I'm leaving behind? I'm leaving behind Dark Fog, Anger of the Dead, and Rest in Shade, unless it's a really big scenario, in which case I'm probably leaving Fluid Night behind, and I'm taking Rest in Shade so I can move my shadows around, a lot more. If you could, please go ahead and check out my recommended products. I get a small commission for anything you buy from there, and I need your support to help this channel grow so I can continue putting out great content. Thanks so much for watching the video.